Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to see this amazing turnout. Thanks to ALN for organizing this incredible initiative and important campaign. My name is Giselle, or I go by Gigi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the programs director at NorCal Resist. And this is so exciting because I think one of the missing pieces in trying to make sure that we are a sanctuary city is to plug in neighbors, which in many cases does include these kind of business owners or community spaces, places of faith, right? So you will be, being that bridge. So thank you so much for being here. And so in preparation of the kinds of conversations that we're going to be having with the community, it's really important for us to kind of know what these rights look like, that these places of, again, these community spaces, businesses can assert, so that you can really give them confidence in being able to assert it. Give them confidence in putting up a sign, right? And adopting the kind of intake form, crisis manage. Yeah, thank you. The pledge, and then your crisis worksheet. Sorry, I forgot. Thank you. Um, um, we want to be able to walk them through that none of this that we are encouraging them to do is, we're not asking them to break the law. We're asking them to assert their legal rights, right? And by simply doing that, we are protecting our most vulnerable neighbors, right? And that can include their staff, not just their patrons or their congregants, right? But also the people that they have grown to care about, right? Through their working relationship. So that being said, we should talk about just we're going to do like a rapid fire KYR for these quasi public private spaces. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, you all already know, but we're just going to do a refresher. And so the way that we want to picture it is sort of like a spectrum of rights, right? When it comes to privacy. And so you are most protected under the law in a private space. Okay, you're most vulnerable in public spaces. And so that distinction between the private space and the public space is what really allows spaces, whether they be business, community spaces, to be able to assert their right to deny law enforcement access into their facilities. But that's going to be the private spaces that are protected, right? So for us, it's important for us to really kind of nail down that delineation of private and public, so that we're going, when we're going into different kinds of places, whether it be restaurants, places of worship, gyms, there's one next door, right? How can we kind of have that conversation and map it out with owners, right? And so, what are the fundamental things that we want to talk about when encouraging business owners that they likely do have at least one private space in their workplace, right? And that they have an absolute right to deny law enforcement access is maybe as soon as we walk in, we can scope out that area. So if we walk into this wonderful establishment, Mesa, right? What area might you guys think is a public space here within the restaurant? Yeah, exactly. Um, what about a private space that you can deny access to law enforcement?
The kitchen?
Yes. And why would that? What would make that a private space?
That's where employees go to work, not like everybody can go there, not customers and stuff can go there.
Right there, exactly. So it's customary, it's a matter of daily routine practice that patrons from the community don't just walk into the restaurant and just go to the kitchen and start cooking, right? They don't go back to any office in the back and start crunching numbers for the restaurant, right? You have to have authorization to enter the kitchen, the office in the back. right? And so that is a way that you can distinguish between the private and public spaces within an establishment. So in the same way, law enforcement would be able to walk in this restaurant and, kind of search this area that's public, but to access the kitchen or any of those private areas, or for example, I don't know what's behind here, but this door says employees only, right? They need authorization or they need a valid judicial warrant, right? And it's really important that we talk to business. Did you have your hand? I'm so sorry, I can't see it. No, please.
My question is, would the bathroom also be a private area? Okay.
No, so it depends, right? So if it's customary for that business to let folks just come in and, hey, can I use the bathroom? Yeah, go ahead. Then that's more of a public space, right? But there are some businesses that require you to purchase something and receive a code, right? Then that changes the designation of that space. So it's really about not just to say the kitchen blanket means that it's private, because if it's a kind of establishment that encourages community to walk in and join the chefs or something, then it becomes public, right? But it's a matter of how are they routinely using those spaces. That is what will be, defining the characterization of that space. And so it's really important that we emphasize that everyone on staff, oh, yes. So those are the gray areas that law enforcement will want to challenge you on, right? Which is why, as part of this campaign, we want to encourage them to actually use signage on any area that's private, because then you're reinforcing your kind of legal standing to say, listen, we have a sign there. It's our regular routine practice that's a private space. So you have to produce the warrant. Whereas right now, without a sign, law enforcement is going to say, well, this isn't even, a door. So anyone can peek through it. So they're not taking the privacy of that space seriously. And therefore, it does not require a warrant, right? So these conversations, having workplace plans, mapping every space that you want to make an emergency response plan for, and do the classifications of spaces is critical, right? Because you can also create a space and make it private. Let's say this didn't have the sign and it was open to everyone, and this was just open, the curtain all the time, but we want to create a safe space so that if law enforcement comes, an impacted person might be able to go there for safety. And so we create it now, but it's not only about signage, right? We can't just slap a sign on something, call it private, but then it's open to everyone all the time. Because unfortunately, law enforcement, and it's particularly, especially when we're thinking about ICE enforcement action right now, they're scoping out locations before they actually execute a search or an arrest on the premises, right? And so if you stand there and say, look, we have a sign, it is private. Well, no, because we've been watching you. And actually, people go in and out of there all the time without authorization, right? So it also has to be implemented as routine practice so that we can classify those spaces as private. And it's crucial that everyone on staff knows this, which is why if a location is willing to take the pledge, they can actually request to schedule a Know Your Rights training for their staff, and they can also help request getting support to develop a workplace plan, right? So that we can help them do the mapping. We can talk to staff, because what happens is, if only, let's say, the manager on site is trained, right? And ICE comes in, but the manager isn't always there, right? And so then, maybe a shift lead is on site that day and law enforcement comes in and they're afraid because they're scary. They come in with their bulletproof vests and their guns and their masks, right? So they're like, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead, officer. Because we're kind of conditioned to show deference to law enforcement, right? We don't want any trouble. And so because they weren't prepared, they weren't trained, that authorization essentially voids the warrant requirement. And so now they're not entering and violating your rights because you consented for them to enter. Even if it's a quick, no, go ahead, right? Even if you didn't intend it, you didn't know what you were doing, not knowing, unfortunately, isn't a defense, right? And so making sure that everyone on the team is knows what the rights are, how to assert them is critical. And we can use that as an example, right, about the importance of making sure that everyone on staff is prepared, especially if it might be, maybe a restaurant that has impacted staff on the team. It's important to have plans in place that also protects our own teams, right? And there's a template that can be provided to folks so that they have an idea of what it looks like to kind of make an emergency protocol, right? Because sometimes we can go through all these trainings, but in a moment of crisis, in that kind of emergency moment, the nerves, we're human, the nerves can take over, and then suddenly everything we know goes out the window, okay? And that's 100% fair. And so we're encouraging workplaces to also have a printed protocol so they can just, okay, look at it real quick. Step one, we're encouraging people to have whistle kits because you can blow the whistle, alert staff, they can seek safety, right? Step two, start recording. That is crucial. You have a right to record. And the first thing law enforcement is going to tell you, don't record me. I don't consent. And because we're intimidated, because they're scary, okay, officer, I don't want any problems, right? But you can assert it, right? If you're in a public space, this is a public space. I have a right to record law enforcement. And if you're in a private space like your workplace, you have a protocol in place that allows you to record. You have authorization to do it, so you can proceed. And then call, sometimes, business locations, spaces have their own legal counsel. Call them. If not, call the rapid response hotline so we can immediately dispatch observers to support the location, get the proper documentation, whatever is needed in that moment. And then the rights that are listed there, don't consent to a search. Do remain silent. The right to remain silent is probably one of our most important rights of all. We have very few rights when push comes to shove, but the right to remain silent is the one that really allows us to protect ourselves and each other, right? Don't sign anything. You never want to sign an order of removal or maybe admit to something you did not do. Do say you want to speak to an attorney. And don't ever provide false documents. Oftentimes when they do go to workplaces, they want to try to collect some kind of documentation, employee records to see if maybe they provided a work permit that wasn't theirs or a social security card that wasn't valid, right? But we don't want to provide that. We want to wait until there's a valid search warrant or a subpoena and understand what are the limits of the demands, right? And so after that, once something happens, guide them, hey, we have a crisis management worksheet so that we can make sure we're detailing every single thing that happened. And most importantly, if they did detain someone, making sure we're getting them assistance, right? So I know that was a speed round, but are there any questions, especially around the core rights and that distinction between the public and private space? So it's going to depend a lot of it on like the physical, the way that it's, designed inside, right? Because let's say if there's a lobby, that lobby is still probably going to be open, right? A public space, because folks still need to step into that lobby, check in, and be verified whether they have an appointment or not. But any space after that initial check-in kind of space might be private, depending on it. You really have to look at the spatial location and, of course, how they use it, right? If they have, so something, for example, Narco Resist does, we have the number pad on all of our doors. And it's the most annoying thing ever. Every time you go through a door, right? But the idea is, if you don't have a code, you don't have the authorization. It's creating that extra barrier, right? And so, we want to also encourage business owners in these conversations about taking those extra steps to be very clear in the designations of private and private. So if they do want appointment only, there are some businesses that have like a little buzzer, right? So that it's locked, but the check-in is no longer in the lobby. You're checking in from the sidewalk. Oh, I have a 12 o'clock appointment, right? My name is Giselle, whatever. And I hate the fact that we can't always give a clear answer, right, with examples, but it really is going to depend on the nature of like the physical location and their practice. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. And there's some really good materials that the team at ALN put together, right? So we have signage for folks. We want to encourage them to put up signs. Mesa is amazing. They have their signs already. But how wonderful is it for us to be able to walk through the community and we're seeing no ICE signs here. This is a safe space, right? It's a huge message of who we are as a community, right? And if you're impacted, it's kind of like a sign of, it's like a feeling of relief when you walk by and see that. Be like, oh, people actually care. People actually see me, right? So we want to encourage them to put the signage. But definitely, we want folks to also take the pledge because we're going to be collaborating with AALN to make sure that we're giving folks, businesses and community spaces a Know Your Rights training, help them develop the workplace plan. We can also provide tons of whistle kits, tons of Know Your Rights cards if they want to. But we want to make sure that when we're talking to, our neighbors out and we're canvassing, that we're telling them, you're not doing this alone. We're not telling you that you're just gonna, put up a sign and then you're on your own. No, we're gonna actually give you all the resources and support that you need, right? You have the hotline, you can call us in the moment. You have an opportunity to get that Know Your Rights presentation, the plan. You can have all the kits, everything you need, we're here for you. And that way we can also build those stronger connections with all of our neighbors throughout town. That's awesome. Okay, yes. So the hotline is crucial. The rapid response hotline has been around since the first Trump administration, and it's a really important tool. NorCal Resist does manage the hotline. It's 24/7, and you can call or text it. And this is a really important resource to tell folks because you can tell them if law enforcement tries to enter your business, your community space, your first call should be NorCal Resist, the rapid response hotline, right? Because what happens? We immediately dispatch trained observers to go to the location and support you. Sometimes that means yelling what your rights are to remind you in that moment, right? That means helping you with documentation, making sure that the appropriate information was collected on whoever was detained. Because what happens is when you notify the hotline that someone was detained by ICE, we follow up, right? We do our best to make sure we get a immigration attorney over at 650 Capitol Mall so they can have a consultation, get an assessment on what they need, and from there, we kind of see what's next, right? Do they need help with a habeas petition? If they qualify for a bond, NorCal Resist will post the bond, right? Things like that. So that contact with the hotline is critical so that we can make sure that anyone who was detained can be supported. But also, it's also a point of letting these, business owners and members of the community know that, let's say, law enforcement shows up with a warrant and you're like, oh, I don't know if it's real or not, you guys. You can take a picture of it and you can text it to the hotline and we can help you verify it. Because unfortunately, law enforcement is using administrative warrants, or sometimes they'll even download a template and it's not signed, right? It's not even applicable to the location, but people see it and it's like you're nervous. You're like, okay, I have a warrant. They open the door. They grant them access, right? So that's another kind of resource that we want to empower folks in the community with. That, again, you're not alone. You call the hotline. We're going to help you navigate the entire process. We're going to send people over. And if anyone is detained, we're going to do our best to support them. And we've actually had that situation where we've had people, someone after the, wait, no, this is recorded. We've had situations though where people are live talking to us on the phone in the middle of an interaction, and we're letting them know, okay, these are your rights, right, and reminding them in that moment. So it's actually a really helpful tool. A lot of this and all of these tools are made so that we're not relying on our memory and our instincts in a moment of crisis. Because that's the worst thing to do. I know me, I forget everything, right? And so this crisis management worksheet is a way, it's kind of like a checklist so that folks can follow through, but also so that they remember what information they should be collecting in that moment, because documentation during an interaction with law enforcement is crucial, right? So like one of the I love this, right? Information to collect if you can. What were the names of the law enforcement officers that arrived? Ask for their badge numbers. Did they give it or did they refuse? What vehicles did they come in? Can we quickly run out on their way out and get their license plate numbers? It also gives you the information to collect when someone is like who is detained, so that information is so crucial, because unfortunately ICE is trying to block lawyers from accessing individuals once they're detained. And they're saying, well, we need, back in the day, it was just their name, date of birth, maybe a number, or one or the other. Now they're requiring name, date of birth, an emergency contact, country of origin, and their A number, just to get a lawyer to see them, right? And unfortunately, not everyone knows their A number. An A number is short. It's essentially, think of like their immigration number. It's their file number. It's designated to them once they are going through any kind of immigration proceedings or petition. And so this is super critical to make sure that we're encouraging folks on the ground to gather the right documentation, because if there were witnesses, right, and we can get them to write a statement, a declaration, then we can hold law enforcement accountable if they actually violated the law, if they violated our rights, right? So all of this is incredibly critical. Again, the goal, and I think the approach that we want to have when talking to, community members is, this is to empower you to protect each other, right? That's really what it is, and to make it easier on you in a moment that is incredibly scary and nerve-wracking. So a lot of this is going to depend on if there's an agreement with management, right? But let's say there's not, because more often than not, there isn't. Like, and management isn't always as amazing as here and on board, right? And so let's say in your own personal capacity as, someone on staff in a restaurant, okay? So what would happen if law enforcement walks in right now, right? They're gonna come in at minimum 2 agents. If it's gonna be a public space like this, it might be a little bit more than that. They're gonna come in, again, bulletproof vests, face masks, their guns, right? And they're gonna be like, the first thing they're probably gonna do is storm in. Everyone is gonna be stressed and scared, right? And so, as staff, right, in that moment, I haven't trained everyone who's here, visiting, right, and dining. But hopefully, I understand my role as the kind of the guardian, almost like you are creating a threshold, right? So in that moment, it's like, officer, you're kind of, if you're okay with this, because we understand everyone has different positionalities, everyone has different risk levels too. But if you're okay with it, right, you can kind of use your body. And they're trying to enter here because they think, oh, this is a door. Who's there, right? Someone is hiding. Or it's possible that some patrons ran here immediately, right, for safety or staff. And so immediately, I'm going to start recording, right? Because that's the first thing you really have to do, is start recording, right? And then verbally refuse access. Officer, These are private areas. You do not have authorization to enter these spaces. You have to produce a judicial warrant, right? And we have to say these things out loud, right? We can't just, like, even if we have a plan, we can't just show them it and be like, okay, follow it, right? No, you have to verbally assert all of your rights, because think of it again like that light switch. If you don't turn it on, you're not actually under the protection of those rights, right? So you're gonna make sure to refuse access to those spaces, and then you're continuing to record the entire time. Okay, don't stop recording, please. This is crucial, because you're creating a record of defense for yourself and a record of accountability for them, right? And then immediately, because you know your rights, right? You've all done the trainings. You're gonna start collectively asserting these rights. So on behalf of your staff, on behalf of the patrons, you can start saying, everyone here is collectively asserting our rights. The first one, we do not consent to a search. The second is we are asserting our right to remain silent, and we want to speak to an attorney. And it's also important that ideally, as people try to start kind of like shifting out of the nerves and moving, ideally, in the moment that an officer says, all right, if you're undocumented, go to the right. If you are a citizen, go to the left. It's important to say, we are staying still. We don't have to do that, right? Because if we comply with that order, you're essentially singling out the most vulnerable who they're trying to target, right? But if you agree, and if you can kind of remind it, and hopefully folks follow your cues, not everyone will in the nerves, right? But hopefully by you really vocally telling them, we don't have to move, we are staying still, you are then preventing that very easy, you're not making their job easier, right? By essentially creating that division between those who have status and those who don't, right? So you're going to start making sure that you're asserting your rights, and then hopefully, and this is hard if you're just one person, hopefully you have other team members there who can help you. But as you're recording, as you're trying to assert these rights, you're also going to want to be calling the rapid response hotline. So I know it's kind of like steps, but it should also be happening simultaneously, which is easier if you have multiple people, right, there to support you. But you're going to start calling the hotline, even if you can't give a full attention to a phone call, because you're still trying to be that threshold, right? You can text, hey, I'm at 1234 J Street, come now, ICE is here, right? And then continue to make sure that you are kind of being that threshold, documenting, and not allowing them. And if there's other folks on staff, making sure also that you continue to reiterate those rights, because if they see that you're strong, they might look to another member of your team and kind of want to intimidate them. And if that person gives them authorization, then they have authorization to go in, which is why a lot of this effort is collective, right? We all have to be on the same page. So if that means that you know that maybe your team members are a little bit more shy, and maybe they're a little bit more nervous, and you can really assert your, your voice and these rights, take it upon yourself to make sure that you are repeating these rights over and over again. In the meantime, that either observers come through, or if they don't have a warrant, they'll leave if you stand your ground, right? Because they know that that's the only way they can actually really go through this threshold. Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the situation, right? But we definitely have volunteers that speak all kinds of languages. We have folks who are answering the phones that speak multiple languages too. But also, if there's a language barrier, we do ask folks, okay, text us immediately the address, and then text us the situation, and then we Google Translate it, y'all. We have done so many things through Google Translate until we can then get a volunteer to come and who speaks the language and come quickly. But in that moment, it's about, we need the address, we're on our way kind of a thing, right? So then we're like, send it via the text, which is why the hotline, the text kind of feature of it is really important, because we've also had folks who were really afraid to speak out loud because someone, ICE is knocking on the door, and so they're like, I actually don't want to, speak because I don't want them to hear that I'm inside. And so they'll text us instead. And that also helps us be able to address those situations. But anything that is else that is really needed, if it's communicated to us, we'll do our best to make sure that we are meeting the need. Especially for the greater Sacramento area, we do cover more rural counties up north, right? And so that's going to depend on capacity and volunteers, which is why we're constantly holding these Migra Watch Observer trainings to get more people into the network. Because the more folks we have, then we're closer to every point that something could potentially happen, and then turnaround time is quick, right? But in the Sacramento, yeah, we can get there very quickly. But it's also really important to let folks know that when you call, it has to be immediately, because oftentimes people will call us once ICE has left, and so we kind of get there and it's like they're gone, right? We can't, yeah. So that's why it has to be like on the top of the steps, like step one, record, call the hotline, assert those rights, etc. Right now, and especially given that unfortunately ICE is not always wearing a uniform, and more often than not, they're wearing plain clothes. Again, those masks, they're wearing jeans, plaid shirts. Yeah, exactly. They're definitely not wearing their nothing that would identify them as being an official agent, right? There's a lot of anxiety in the community, and so oftentimes, they'll see a big SUV with tinted windows, and then we get a call, right? I think ICE is here. And so then they call us, or it's on Facebook. Oh my gosh, there's always a Facebook post that says ICE is doing a checkpoint, a DUI checkpoint on Florent or whatever, right? So far, ICE has not done checkpoints in Northern California. That's more a border patrol thing down south in between like international borders and some interstate borders. But that creates so much fear and paranoia in the community. And so for us, it's really important that you call those in, because then we go out and verify. Because that's the first step that any observer is going to do, is first verify, is it even ICE? I mean, we've gone to calls, and I always say this, but we've gone to calls and it's been the park rangers, because they have a white SUVs with green, which kind of looks like border patrol, right? And so that's totally fine. Call us, let's verify, and then we can let the community know, hey, we know this rumor is going around that ICE is, but don't worry, we verified. It's the sheriff or it's park rangers, right? And now people can resume their day-to-day life again. Because I can't tell you how many parents call us and say, I can't go and pick up my kids because I'm scared that, I saw this post or someone is telling me that ICE is down the block, right? So it's also part of a community effort to make sure that we're giving some sort of like emotional relief as well to these families, right, who feel the pressure of all of this persecution. Yeah. Any other questions? Are we feeling good to go and knock on these doors? And yeah.
Is there any way for us to like differentiate between ICE and someone impersonating ICE?
Yeah, no, definitely. So honestly, it's really hard to know if someone is impersonating them, because the problem is that ICE isn't identifying themselves, right? So I will be honest with that. But here are some patterns, at least, that we're seeing within Sacramento and the greater Northern California region, right? They are usually wearing plain clothes. They are unfortunately also wearing masks. They're at least going to be in pairs of 2 or more. They are usually in American model SUVs, newer models, fully unmarked, but they're going to have super dark tint, okay? All the windows, like more than the legal limit, right? So that's a good way to tell. And in terms of them, they usually are going to have a bulletproof vest. Unfortunately, they're supposed to have the agency name. It's supposed to say Police ICE. But now what we're seeing is that they just put the front label of police and they're not putting ICE in the back. So, it's not a for sure, but additionally, the way that they move about the community too, right? Like what kind of spaces are they targeting? They also usually wait out a bit in front of a location before going in. They basically because the majority of the detentions in Northern California are targeted, so they have the name of a person that they're going to pick up essentially, right? And so they're scoping out that place to see if that person is in there, when they're coming out, etc. So those kinds of behaviors and like physical signs are what you want to look out for. They're going to be likely in plain clothes, but they're probably going to have a vest, right? If it has an agency, it'll just say police. It won't say ICE. They're likely going to have a mask. Their vehicles, they're usually American model SUVs. And then another thing is what we do see is most of the time when people ask other agencies, they do reveal themselves. So SAC PD will say they're SAC PD. The sheriffs will say they're the sheriff's office. Park rangers are going to say they're the park rangers, right? But ICE does not identify themselves whatsoever. We are seeing that SAC PD, SAC County Sheriff, they're more amenable to disclosing their identities. They're wearing their uniforms. They're using their official like agency vehicles as well. And a lot of that bit has been because community efforts has raised these concerns. I remember early last year at the same time that ICE was deploying all of these unmarked vehicles, the sheriff's office was also starting to use like these SUV for like their operations, right? When they go, and so, a lot of community raised concerns. And so we've seen some adjustments. And so ICE is really the one who's not disclosing that. Now, that also looks different in rural counties where local law enforcement is a little bit more agreeable to ICE. And so they might not. But in our region, for the purposes of our region, for the most part, other local agencies are identifying themselves. Encouraging community to document has been such a big priority because when it becomes a he said, she said with law enforcement, courts are going to give deference to police, right? But if we have documentation to say, hey, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't obstruct, I just asserted my rights, but look what they did. They violated my rights. They beat me. They blah, 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 right? We're pulling up the receipts through our documentation. So it's our own record of defense as well. So technically, because of California sanctuary law, state and local law enforcement agencies are not supposed to be collaborating with federal immigration enforcement. There are very narrow exceptions under state law. So, for example, if someone is being transferred from a prison because of a violent crime, then state and local authorities are allowed to help with that transfer or something like that, right? But there are very narrow exceptions under the law. So for the most part, the Sacramento County Sheriff is not allowed to collaborate. And so in terms of whether or not they're doing it right now, I don't think we have anything on record over the past year that shows that, but it's something that we're constantly monitoring for. Back in 2021 or 2022, NorCal Resist was involved in litigation against the Sacramento County Sheriff at the time because they were violating sanctuary law. And so we've been under a settlement agreement since then, and they've supposedly been following it. But again, it's something we got to keep monitoring, and that's why documenting is important, because if ICE shows up here and then we see a SAC PD vehicle, we need to document that because that could be a potential violation of state law, right? And so we need to investigate why was SAC PD there helping with the investigation, or were they helping in the first place, and then why? Definitely, yeah. That's another, like with the bulletproof vest and the holsters with either a gun and then a taser on the other side. That's a big tell that it is law enforcement, yeah. And so it's more about how can we support each other and the impacted community, itself on advocating, right, for these issues, protecting themselves. We have Court Watch. We have classes for Afghan women so they can learn how to drive and teach them how to read and write because they were denied an education in Afghanistan. So it's about that kind of mutual aid. But in terms of direct policy engagement with our institutions, we don't do that work really. We have other incredible orgs that do that work. So plug in with AALN.
Thank you so much, Giselle, for joining
Thank
us.
you. Thank